Well, hello, and welcome to this first in a series of Multiplying Leader podcasts. My name is Ben Ingebretson. I'm the area director for New Church Development in the Dakotas and Minnesota Conference, and it's a real privilege to sit with you and your district leader and pastors around a table and just have a conversation for the next 30 or 40 minutes or so around being a multiplying leader. And I am here with a friend, Brad Kalayjian, and I'm going to let Brad introduce himself. Brad, your turn.
Well, thank you, Ben. Thanks for the invitation to come, and welcome to all of you who are listening to this podcast. I'm serving in the West Michigan Conference. I've been here in one district, actually, my whole ministry. Had an opportunity to plant Cornerstone Church 27 years ago this month. And so somehow I've survived in the same space through, I think, 5 different bishops, and have been able to continue ministry and just watch it grow over the years. So I'm delighted to share some of my experiences as well as some of my friends and colleagues, and it's good to be with you here.
So Brad has not only planted Cornerstone, but he's planted multiple campuses and services, and he's going to unpack some of those stories along the way. Let me just take a few minutes and set up these 6 podcasts. We're talking for these opening minutes around the style and strategies of multiplying leaders. Leaders that have proven their ability to multiply. And let me just give you a little bit of a bio picture. For 12 years, I worked with 100 multiplying leaders in another tribe and had kind of a ringside seat as they planted 250 churches. And that becomes kind of I call it an empirical base for some of the observations I'll bring to the table along the way, as I've had a chance to walk alongside real multipliers and learn from them and learn with them. We're really talking about adaptive leadership. You know, there's a lot of talk these days around adaptive and technical change. Technical change is kind of at the level of doing. It's more, some would say, superficial. It can be complex, but it doesn't challenge real deep assumptions. Adaptive leadership is about values and deeply held assumptions. And so each of these podcasts is going to focus on an adaptive leadership principle. And our hope is that in these 30 to 40 minutes or so, we'll set you up for a dialogue or a discussion in your group that will take you another 30 or 40 minutes or so to kind of go around the circle and unpack. And then we'll set you up for an action conversation, because the design of these podcasts is not just to tease your thinking a bit, but really to get you set up for a check-in around the circle of friends that you're seated with today, talking about specific project development in your context. You know, all ministries local, everything is contextual, and so our hope is that the principles we share are ones you can wrestle with applying to your setting. And that probably take you another 60 minutes to go around your circle and give everyone a chance to check in. So our thought is that this is a 2 to 3 hour covenant group gathering, and there'll be online materials to kind of help you develop your project, and those are in the handouts that you have and in the printed resources that complement these sessions, so that you can move from kind of design to deploy and actually start some new ministries. For some of you folks, it'll be a parenting field guide that'll help you, models that pertain to either hiring a planter or not hiring a planter, and multiplying your own platforms for gospel ministry. So a lot of different ways to demonstrate multiplication. There are field guides to help you execute, and again, that material is available online. So take a break, take a minute now, and just align your group with how you see you using your time, your schedule. Think again of these 45-minute podcasts, 45 minutes perhaps a discussion of the principles from the podcast, and then 60 minutes to talk about kind of check-in and peer coaching. Take a break. and just get your group plan aligned. And we'll be back with you in a minute. All right, well, welcome back. And so today we're going to really dive into the first area of beginning with the why, or developing deep multiplication values. Multiplying leaders don't just start with mechanics of starting something new. There's so much that is of a mechanical nature to do. There's probably 200-300 tasks to accomplish when you start a second service, start a second site. But multiplying leaders, really, in my observation, as I've worked alongside so many, they really start at a level of deep motivation anchored into deep values that drive them forward and compel them forward in ministry. So Brad, your turn. Talk with us a little bit about Cornerstone, Gospel Passion, your why. Go there for a few minutes.
Well, Ben, I think really I think that one business that Jesus has called us to be in is to reach out to people that are disconnected from God. And I think it's been my experience over the years that just looking at so many of our UMC churches that we get connected with almost every other business possible. There are so many churches that feel like the fall bazaar, the Christmas pageant, the chicken dinners that raise money, and all sorts of other things are really the big deal because they drain off the congregation's energy year in, year out. And one of the things that's been I think a driving force here at Cornerstone is that we have had a deep, deep sense that we're really about the 99 and 1. It's about finding that person out there who's not here yet, who is not connected with the love of Jesus, hasn't experienced the transformation in his or her life, and so we try to keep that person. We've even sketched out who that person might be and what they might look like, just to keep it in front of us. And so deep down in our souls is our mission to help people know Jesus and make Jesus known. And so that really drives us. It helps us sort through so many other activities that we don't do, just because they take too much time and too much energy, and they aren't relevant to the mission. So I really believe a church is not hasn't been assigned by God to just help people become better people. I mean, it's bigger than that. God has planted us as outposts all around this world in order to reach people that have never been reached. And unless you have that down in your gut, I think, you're going to struggle with even the why behind what you're trying to encourage churches to be about here. So I just really encourage you that if you haven't thought about that in a long time, our primary business is nothing else but connecting people with God. And we do that in a lot of different ways, spiritually, socially, missionally, all kinds of different ways. But that's our primary business. And I just hope it's deep within you, because that's the motivating, and that's a message you have to communicate to your congregation, over and over and over in gentle ways, but to keep them focused, because people lose the vision so fast, and we leak, and we get off on all kinds of other tangents, and but we got to keep coming back. Jesus said the 99 really are good, they're safe, but the one out there is lost. And I just would challenge you to ask the question, who's not here yet? That's been a question we've had over the years. We know who's here, but who's not here? And how do we reach that one person?
So it's been said that when your why is clear, your objective has more power and more impact because you're more deeply connected to your purpose. And that's a line that Bishop O has used recently. Another source, some of you may know the name Simon Sinek, who talks about beginning with why, not beginning with what or how, but beginning with why. It's a business principle. Even when organizations think about being effective in the marketplace, it's like, why are we doing this? And getting back to that really core, compelling source of energy. So I think of that as having two dimensions. There's like the why of the gospel. And now I'm thinking Adam Hamilton. Some of you may know Adam's little sequence. Why God? Why Jesus? Why church? Why my church? Why God? Why Jesus? Why the gospel? Another great source, Martha Reese in her book, Unbinding the Gospel, who talks about just the multi-dimensional but compelling why of the gospel. It hits all of us in a different way. Jesus is a healer. Jesus is a bringer of hope, of purpose, forgiveness. The list is fairly long. But the why is always something very deep and compelling. And the why of the gospel is what anchors us. Brad, what I'm hearing you say is that's really what anchors you really deep into this mission called Cornerstone. Talk a little bit more about how does Cornerstone communicate the gospel? Say a little bit about that. How does this come out in your weekend worship? How does it come out in the way you design services? Your turn.
I think there's a couple different ways. We have 3 sites now around Grand Rapids area, Michigan, and our mission statement is very simple. I referred to it before, helping people know Jesus and make him known. And that phrase is in large block letters on all 3 of our campus back walls. So as people exit the worship centers, every weekend worship, they're looking at the mission over and over. We have moved to video announcements here, and it is every week. We call it the link. It starts with, hey, we're one church in 3 locations, and our mission is to help people know Jesus and make him known. And so I don't think there's hardly anybody that comes to Cornerstone that can't simply state the mission. And so I think that's one really important thing. How we communicate that is certainly through those things that I just talked about, but also we made a decision that one of our core values at Cornerstone is going to be to communicate conversationally. We don't believe in preacher voices. We don't use large theological words that people don't understand or cliche phrases. And we talk very casually and intensely, and we challenge people, but we do it in terms they can understand. We dress conversationally. You don't have to dress up to come to Cornerstone. In fact, when it comes to clergy clothes, I've only worn a robe here one time in 27 years, and that was a week we were demonstrating a message about judging people by how they look. So and that's not a statement for or against clergy clothes. It's just simply saying one of our core values is conversational, and so we try to communicate that the best we can. But we continually encourage people every week to invite people they know whether they're their friends or their enemies, but really keep reaching out. And that's a message that's deeply ingrained, I think, into our church.
Some of us come from churches where this value is not deeply ingrained. I mean, every church really needs to face the defining question, is the church for us or is the church for them? And many of us have felt that tension in ministry. The answer is probably both. The church is for us and for them. The real question is who in that tension gets served first. Who's the priority? And Cornerstone, if I hear you right, has answered the question, really going back into Scripture with a priority on the outsider. And you've made it clear that even at Cornerstone, that vision leaks, and so you're always reinforcing it. But it's a value shift that, if I understand you, really impacts much of what you do, your language, your tone, even your dress. It drives your innovation, as you've shared with me. And I can see your nod, so I think we get it. So let's turn the corner to another dimension of the why, and that's kind of at the very personal level. I mean, we can talk about the deep why of the gospel as a movement across human history. But, you know, how is it that the deep why of the gospel intersects with my personal story? I've heard a phrase, the grip of the gospel. How is it that the grip of the gospel still has a hold on me as pastoral leader? I mean, for some of us, it takes us back to, like, why did we even start this ministry gig altogether? Brad, talk a little bit about how does the very kind of reality of the power of the gospel still drive you in your ministry at a personal level?
I think for me, and everyone experiences the call to ministry, I think, in different ways. But for me, I grew up in another denomination that was very mission oriented. In fact, my mother's family had missionaries around the world, literally, Indonesia, Africa, Thailand, and so those folks were coming home on furloughs and staying at our house, having dinner with us, telling stories. I literally grew up with a sense of the world is our parish, and it's not just limited to the place where we live. And so that experience for me, even though I did not stay in that denomination, it was just a little bit narrow, but I'm very thankful for it because it put inside of me a passion for evangelism that sometimes I think is lacking in some of our churches, and some of us have never been exposed to that way of thinking or feeling. But it's deep inside of me to be constantly reaching out and seeing people disconnected from God and doing everything I can to move my church and move our people into having that kind of heart that Jesus had for people who were the least, the lost, the people on the outskirts, people on the margins, and even rich people or any kind of person who has not experienced the love of Jesus and the transformation of salvation. So that's deep inside of me. I don't think it'll ever go away. I'm thankful for it. I didn't want to stay there totally, but I've been very thankful for actually the United Methodist Church. It's just been a wide open door of ministry, and people are hungry for the gospel, and I'm really glad to serve here.
So that's curious how some of those impulses. I mean, we can trace them back to our childhood. I was talking with a district leader here recently, and they talked about a transformational experience in their youth as well, and how they can still kind of get in touch with that tap root of passion for the gospel. And that's real. I mean, that stuff is a place you got to go to kind of keep you anchored in, the stuff that sometimes pastoral leaders that want to be change agents and really want to see a congregation do some cool new stuff, you have to wade through some stuff in order to get there. Interesting sidebar. we all share in this Methodist tradition a commitment to social transformation. A deep value in our faith is both the individual transformation and the societal transformation, the justice issues. But here's the adaptive shift for many of us who have a commitment to social justice, perhaps. And that is, let me approach it this way. The folks at Emory University did a little work and developed a theory of social change. You can find it online. There's some resources that it's fairly well published. They think of one person describing it, talked about concentric circles. Starting with the center, you begin with individual beliefs and attitudes. Social change really begins at that level of individual beliefs and attitudes. Some say, that's where the evangelical arm of the church has done particularly well. But then there's the next concentric circle that talks about, working those individual beliefs and attitudes out into interpersonal change with family members, peers, associations. And then the next concentric circle to kind of the communal or the community level of social networks, norms, and standards. I worked with a community recently, going back a few years, where they really tried to raise the level of commitment in couple relationships. And it was a social network norm and standard kind of a social change objective as they did more aggressive work with premarital couples and that kind of thing. So that's the next concentric circle in the Emory theory. And then they go to the institutional circle, the next larger concentric circle, where you talk about rules and regulations and policies, and then ultimately to the structural level, where you're talking about even legalities at the local, state, or national level. So I guess maybe here's the point, is that there is a kind of a seamless interconnect between individual beliefs and attitudes and societal or structural change. And so it doesn't have to be either or. And that really this part of our work together, gospel ministry that really taproots deep into the why, is really anchoring into that end of the continuum that talks about individual beliefs and attitudes and seeking personal transformation in the lives of others, believing that that's the pathway towards structural and societal change long term. Like Wesley's line, there's no public gospel without a personal gospel. There's no personal gospel without a public gospel. So anyway, there's a sidebar. You may find that interesting if you're in a context where people are wondering what's the connection between structural and societal change, justice issues, and this passion for personal evangelism and reaching that one lost sheep that Brad was talking about. So Brad, talk a little bit more about your experience with gospel transformational power. Does anything that we've been talking about hook just a little more insight from your experience?
Yes, let me share in two different worlds, actually, exactly what you're referring to, Ben, because we're in year 27 here at Cornerstone, and we're in the process of working out the next 10 years of vision. And really what we're coming down to is two words that begin with M, to multiply, and that's going to involve multiplying campuses, multiplying leaders, multiplying servants who are engaged in ministry. We're not going to be content until almost everybody's engaged in some kind of ministry. So multiplication at every level, and I think that's just gospel-based. That's just rooted in what Jesus said. I don't believe that any other kind of math is God's math except multiplication. It's certainly not division, and it's occasionally subtraction, but and once in a while some slow addition. But most of us operate on addition, and Jesus encouraged us to operate on multiplication. So we're going to attempt in the next 10 years to multiply on about 5 different fronts. Now, at the same time, the second M is called missional. Our church has taken on a lofty goal of breaking the cycle of poverty in Grand Rapids. And we're about to launch a major new emphasis called For Grand Rapids. And we will attack poverty at the school system level, at the literacy level, at all different kinds of areas where we can help people become self-sustaining. And so I believe that we're just being true to Wesley's, really his encouragement to all Methodists to be offering the gospel for personal transformation as well as involved in cultural change. And so I'm excited about the next 10 years, not just the past. So let me just share one other quick thing. I just got back from Africa, where our church has had a 10-year relationship in northern Kenya, and I have never gone. And so people from our church have been going. We've established all kinds of relationships and partners on the ground over there. And I had the opportunity to visit several of them, and I've come back extremely proud of our church and our work, because it is the same kind of two-dimensional work or three-dimensional work. Part of our ministry is evangelistic. We have partnered with an organization that has produced a small little device. It's a solar-powered device called the Treasure. It has the New Testament in many different tribal languages on it, as well as some discipleship materials and some songs and in languages and songs from different tribal groups. And it is truly a treasure. It is spreading the gospel in powerful ways. People are hungry for it, and the demand is truly great. So our church literally pays for hundreds of these treasures to be distributed, and we get involved with some of the tribal people who are working as evangelists. So there's a way to spread the gospel in that sense. But about 7 years ago, two guys came back from one of these Kenya trips and said, we got to do something about water. And they were just two average lay people from our church. And those guys would not let it go until finally a 501c3 has been created called Zoe Waters. Zoe is Swahili for living waters. And over the last 7 years, Zoe has raised about $1 million for well drilling. And I was able to visit some of these sites in northern Kenya, which is sub-Saharan. The drought there has been 3 to 4 years. It's devastating to communities. And watch how our church has been involved in literally saving lives, because water is life there. There's the living water, and then there's the physical water. And it's just been really exciting to be part of both of those things. And so those are two great sort of illustrations, both from here and somewhere else. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. And so to summarize, technical leadership would be like trying to grow and multiply a congregation without leveraging the transformational power of the gospel. You know, technical leadership is about being a good, nice congregation and like layering over church growth principles, right? But adaptive leadership is about a congregation being transformed by the gospel, by leadership being in touch with their own transformation by the gospel, and channeling that powerful transformational experience and dynamic out into the lives of others. So maybe this is a good place to introduce the values assessment tool that may help you through this series of podcasts. Bob Logan, after studying hundreds of multiplying congregations, found that they had core values that made it natural for them to multiply. And that assessment is available to you online. We've been kind of focusing in our conversation today around the first one of really having a heart for lost, last, least people. And so that values assessment tool might help you, again, go deeper and spark a conversation with your leaders around these podcasts that are really aligned pretty significantly with the outline there from Logan. That assessment tool can be found at the conference area website under church planting, along with a number of other tools that we've talked about. But now, Brad and I want to release you to have a conversation. You have in front of you some discussion questions that we've taken a stab at crafting. If you've got better ones, go for it. But have a conversation together around the principles, these adaptive principles of beginning with the why, values-driven ministry. First, think of Adam Hamilton's 4 whys. Why God? Why Jesus? Why church? Why your church? I mean, how equipped is your congregation to respond to those questions? And what might you do to empower them a bit? Second question, how central to your preaching and teaching and worship is the transformational power of the gospel? And how could you take that up a step? The third question, how could you have a conversation with your leadership around that kind of defining question, who is our priority, insiders or outsiders? It's kind of a look at the collective why, right? And if you wanted to reach outsiders with a higher sense of priority, how might you anchor that value more deeply in the way you do church, the way you do worship? Fourth question, how do you connect the why of the gospel and ministry leadership on a very personal level at this stage of your career? How do you stay in touch with that core motivational passion? How do you nurture it? How do you protect it at times? How do you leverage it for the sake of your ministry? Those questions bring us to a close. Next time, earning trust and leading change. God bless you. Talk to you soon.